1972, I was a young kid going to college in Ontario. I took a train ride home for Christmas that year, and despite the passage of all that time, the memories of that trip still bring a smile to my face. I finally got around to writing about it a couple of years back, 50 years after the fact. Procrastinator or what? But finally, it did get written. But I should say that to appreciate the scope of the ethical battle that was going on in my head, you might have to be of a certain age, because times have changed. You'll see what I mean. So here we go. On the overnight train from London. The train coach was jam-packed with fellow Maritimers and Newfoundlanders all heading home for Christmas. This was party central, or certainly soon would be. You could feel it. I was the last one on, though, and the only seat left for me was a window seat at the front of the coach, beside an older lady. I felt cheated. I didn't want to be sitting beside her. I wanted to be part of that party further on down the car. Disappointed, I threw my suitcase up on the overhead rack and put the shoebox I had also been carrying on my seat. Then I struggled out of my coat the way you do when you don't have enough room to maneuver, half crouched over and twisting to remove one arm and then the other. Finally freed of it, I picked up the box and sat myself down and stuffed it and the coat under my seat. I offered an awkward apology for struggling so much with my coat. The older lady just smiled and nodded. "Where are you heading?" I asked, trying to find that space between annoying questions and not being antisocial, but mainly wanting to find out how long she'd be sitting there. I can't recall exactly what she said. It wasn't as far as I was going, but it was going to be all night. I nodded in response. We settled in silence. I focused on how good it would be tomorrow when I'd arrive home and see my mom and dad and my brother Fulton and my Dorchester friends again. But first there was this 1,400-kilometer train ride to get through. I resigned myself to making the best of it. A coach seat for a long evening and an overnight beside a boring old lady. A few minutes after I settled into my seat, the silence was broken with the thump and gentle jolt of the train couplings tightening, then the high-pitched squeal of steel against steel as the train came to life and we started to pull away for points east. It felt good. The rhythm of the rails and the gentle swaying from the train's movement brought a totally relaxed feeling. It was almost hypnotic. I often sing to myself when I'm trying to kill time, and being on a train, it was natural for my mind to go to train songs. They were some of my favorites anyway. Folsom Prison Blues, Midnight Special, Midnight Train to Georgia, Canadian Railroad Trilogy. In my head, I sang them all as I watched the miles go by. Every once in a while, I'd look at the older lady, hoping she'd be asleep, but she never was. Whenever I stole such a glance, she looked the same, always sitting straight up with that perfect posture, looking ahead, tall and thin, with a face that looked friendly enough, I guess, and with wavy snow-white hair that reminded me of my grandmother. I felt my box under my foot for the upteenth time. I wanted like anything to get into it, but I couldn't if she was there awake. That would be awkward. More than awkward. That would be an ethical dilemma for me. Here's the thing. I was brought up to share, and if it was food, it was especially easy. I could never eat something in front of somebody else without offering them some. It's not complicated, except when it is. Kathy, my classmate and friend, had given me this shoebox the night before. It was a batch of special brownies she had baked as a gift for my trip. Remember, this was 1972, and special was frowned upon. In fact, special was highly illegal. So what was I to do? Share like my mama taught me? If I did that, I would be breaking who knows how many laws and social mores. I wondered just how ethical it would be to give an old lady I didn't know a brownie that she didn't know was laced with cannabis. Honest, Your Honor, I thought I was doing the right thing. I'd like to call my mother to the stand to talk about sharing. While my mind wrestled with this, impatience got the best of me. I leaned over and grabbed the box and laid it on my lap. I felt I had just crossed over the Rubicon. I had come down on the side of etiquette. Manners, after all, is what separates us from the animals, or so my parents had taught me, apparently. I opened the box, pulled back the wax paper, and with an outstretched arm moved it toward the lady. "Excuse me, would you like a brownie?" She looked at them. "Yes, you are very kind. Thank you." Uh-oh, I'm thinking. Now I've done it. Now we'll see where this goes. I grabbed my own brownie and chomped down on it nervously. What struck me right away was how dry it was. It tasted awful. Munching down on it, I remembered the pleased look on Kathy's face the night before when she presented them to me. "A gift for your trip," she said. Kathy was a sweetheart and smarter than a whip, but she was obviously no Betty Crocker. I kept thinking of my elderly seatmate. I looked over. She smiled at me and took another bite. I'm thinking she's probably finishing it just to be polite. There was something about her smile that I hadn't noticed before, though. There seemed to be a warmth to it, but also a distance. She seemed happy and content with whatever thoughts she was processing. I started staring out the window again, wondering about my brownie and daydreaming about home, and back to my train songs. After a bit, I wasn't sure if the brownie was working or whether I should have another. I opted for another. But should I offer this lady another one too? I figured I couldn't not, but that she would probably refuse anyway. "Yes, thank you again." Not what I expected, but in for a penny, in for a pound, as they say. I grabbed another one for myself, closed the box, and put it back under my seat. I looked over to her. We made eye contact. "How far are you going?" she asked. It was her first comment that wasn't a reply to a question. "Heading to New Brunswick," I said. "Going home for Christmas." I saw that smile I'd caught earlier. "Me too," she said. It was definitely a smile of contentment. And there was a warmth in her voice. "By the way, my name is Rebecca, but everybody calls me Becky." "Nice to meet you, Becky. I'm Duncan, but people call me all kinds of things," I replied as I stuck my hand out. She laughed as she accepted my handshake and the stupid joke. There was something very warm about her laugh and about her hand. She asked me how I felt about going home, and I explained how I was especially excited because I hadn't thought I'd be able to swing it, that I had been looking at my first Christmas alone. She said she knew how it felt. Then she changed the subject. She asked about my college and about my hometown. We talked about my family. She seemed genuinely interested and interesting. She had been a teacher. She talked about former students, taking obvious pride in what many of them had accomplished. Every once in a while, our conversation would get drowned out by an extra boisterous chorus of Farewell to Nova Scotia or Sweet Caroline from farther down the coach. We'd look at each other and laugh and sometimes join in, just loud enough that we could hear each other. As much as I earlier wanted to be back there and part of that, I was now more than content with where I was. As to what she meant when she said she knew how it felt about the prospect of spending Christmas alone, she explained that her husband of more than 40 years had died back in the spring, and that she had struggled since. She choked on her next few words, and with a crackling voice talked about how terribly she missed him. She explained that their only child, their daughter Sarah, and her husband wanted her to come live with them, but that she resisted because she didn't want to be a burden, that she felt she'd be in the way, and she feared her mental state was such that she'd not be good to have around the house. I felt a little awkward with the serious turn the conversation had taken, but I wanted to be supportive, so I nodded. She took that as a cue to continue. The smile from earlier returned. But Sarah and her husband had a baby in the fall, she said. He travels for his job a fair bit, and her maternity leave was about to run out. So she asked if I would come down to help look after the little guy. They named him Henry, after Sarah's dad, my husband. They asked me to come for Christmas and then to stay. I wasn't able to go when he was born, but I'm sure ready now, she said, and I'm off to see my grandchild for the first time. I'm going to be the live-in granny, and I can hardly wait. I'm pretty excited about it, as you can probably tell. I could. There was no mistaking that. "Becky, would you like another brownie?" I was still a little nervous about sharing them with her, But everything seemed to be going well, and I felt like having another myself. Actually, she said, aren't you getting hungry for something more substantial? We've been on this train for hours. Let me buy you dinner. I put up a token protest about how I couldn't possibly let her do that. But as I secretly hoped, she insisted. So we looked over the menu, and she got the porter to bring us a couple of roast beef sandwiches and soft drinks. Thanks, I said. It's a hard habit to break, isn't it? Helping out one more struggling student. That smile again. The sandwich tasted wonderful. We had brownies for dessert. At this point, I was feeling comfortable enough to ask her what happened to her husband. She explained that it was a heart attack. She said, I heard him struggling and found him on the kitchen floor. I called 911, but he died in my arms before the ambulance got there. Right there in my arms. That's how the paramedics found us. I was a mess, she said. It all came so fast. I lost my soulmate and, for a time, my reason for living, she explained. I gave her my best impression of a sad, understanding smile. I didn't know what else to do, didn't know how else to react. Then she said, it took a long while, and it was tough, but now I have a reason to live again. I have little Henry to look after. After a brief silence, she volunteered. My Henry was a railroad man, you know. In fact, he worked this very line for nearly 40 years. Really, I said. You know, I've always had this fascination with trains. The power of them, the sounds they make, and all those great train songs. I know, she said. We love them too. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Henry and I used to sing them. We'd be in the car going somewhere and we'd sing train songs and laugh. God, I miss that. I was anxious to tell her. You might not believe this, but when I first sat down, before we started talking, I was looking out the window and singing train songs to myself. She looked at me and nodded. There's some great ones, aren't there? We exchanged our thoughts on the subject, and I could see she was going back and forth between enjoying the conversation and sadly missing what once was. What was your and Henry's favorite? I asked. There were so many, she replied. Our favorite, though, was This Train. Ah, that's a great one, I said. I thought for a minute. I had an idea, but was nervous, thinking Kathy's baked goods might be clouding my better judgment. Should I suggest it? Of course I should. No, don't do that. I don't know. From somewhere inside me, it just came out, even as I hoped I wasn't overstepping any boundaries. I'm certainly no Henry by any means, but do you want to give it a shot? I mean, only if you want to, and you'd have to lead because I don't know all the words. She didn't immediately respond. A few seconds passed, and then she looked straight at me, somewhat expressionless, as if trying to decide. She pauses another few seconds and begins in a soft voice. This train is bound for glory, this train. I jump in, also in a soft voice. This train is bound for glory, this train. She continued with the song. I paused when I needed to sing so she could sing the parts I didn't know. Then I joined back in again for the chorus. On and on we went, and by the end of it she was smiling broadly, and so was I. She reached over and gave my hand a squeeze. Thank you for that, she said. That brought back some great memories. I was proud of myself for making the right call, something I'm not always great at. We continued talking through the night and into the wee hours. It was such an enjoyable time and so engrossing that we didn't notice that the coach had gone from a loud party to she and I being the only ones still awake. Eventually, we nodded off too, not sure which one of us went first. I woke when the porter was trying to wake her. It was morning, well past sunup, and we were just about to pull into her stop. She stood up and moved into the aisle, and so did I. I helped get her bags down from the overhead compartment and put them on the seat. Then I went first, saying how wonderful it was to meet her and what an enjoyable trip she'd made it for me. She expressed similar sentiments and added how grateful she was to be able to talk about Henry. She said she always found that difficult, but with me she found it surprisingly easy. And especially, she says, thanks for the song. We shared a big hug and wished each other a Merry Christmas. She flashed that warm smile one more time, stepped to the doorway of the coach, and descended onto the station platform. The train creaked and rumbled, and on we went, leaving Becky to her new life, looking after her new grandchild. For me, home was now only a few more hours away. Thank you for listening.
So I'm going to read Becky's reply, which was written in response to Duncan's train ride story that you've just heard. And so after reading it, I decided the viewpoint of his fellow passenger would be interesting and worth telling. Because don't we often wonder what happened to the other person? So this is a reply to Duncan's on the overnight train from London, and it's entitled Becky's Reply. The station was packed with people when I arrived. Now just minutes from the final call for all aboard, the last coach was bursting with boisterous travelers. I hadn't been on a train in years, and why I decided to book what was literally the last one out of town before Christmas, I'm not certain. It just worked out that way. The solitary seat that remained available on this car wasn't in the party section. It was right beside me at the front. I saw the disappointment on his face immediately when he realized where he'd be sitting. The last passenger was a young man. He'd dressed for the winter weather, and now as he was safe within the warmth of the rail car, he began climbing out of his heavy coat. Space was at a premium, and he wiggled carefully to extricate himself without bumping me. He'd arrived with his hands full, a suitcase in one, and a rather tattered-looking shoebox in the other. He stowed the case first on the rack above our heads, and then rolled his wool coat into a ball and stuffed it under his seat. The shoebox followed the coat. He had hesitated for only a moment to scan the car for any possible seating options. I'm certain he was hoping to be at the heart of the fun and excitement, but it wasn't to be. He appeared to resign himself quite quickly to being my companion for this journey. I made it a point not to stare as he settled himself into his seat and organized his property. I studied my hands resting in my lap. There was no need to bring any further attention to his obvious misfortune in seating arrangements. He said nothing, and neither did I. The conductor shouted his obligatory call, and with a lurch, our journey began. It was going to be a long trip. I didn't know it then, but this would be the last time I saw Ontario. My husband Henry and I had left our beloved New Brunswick some years earlier. He'd been offered a good job with a major car manufacturer in London, and I found a position as a teacher. Our daughter Sarah had been about 10 when we made the move, and although it had been a good life, Sarah had returned to her roots as soon as she could. Henry and I remained in the city, and then just shortly after our 40th wedding anniversary, Henry died. It was sudden, and the shock of it all had left me rather numb as to what I should do. I had many friends, but no family. When Sarah and her husband asked if I would consider coming to live with them and my beautiful new granddaughter, well, it seemed like the perfect solution. I'm not certain I could have coped with the loneliness or our empty home for much longer. I'd taken a couple of months to sort and pack our lives and then sold the house. All my loved and valued possessions were now headed toward the East Coast in a large transport truck. I had decided to take the train and be at Sarah's by Christmas Eve. It would be the start of a new chapter in my life. Isn't that what people say? They're starting a new chapter or turning the page or a new leaf. I was still deep in grief. I wondered how my nerves would survive the claustrophobic condition I now found myself in. Would I go mad, listening to voices in various keys serenade each other with renditions of Christmas favorites and kitchen party standards? I sat in silence, wishing I'd chosen Air Canada and not the train. The young fellow beside me said nothing, but I could feel him fidget in his seat. Every time he shifted his feet, I heard a dull thud on the shoebox. This was followed by a sigh, but no conversation. I studied my hands again and drifted off into my own thoughts. I could imagine a wonderful Christmas with Sarah. Henry would be happy that we were going to be together. We'd miss him, but we'd be able to share our memories. It was all we could do. I was getting used to the rhythm of the train's motion when suddenly there was a rustling and movement on my right. I peeked sideways and saw the young man was bending over, pulling out the shoebox from beneath his seat. He caught me looking, and as he removed the top, he introduced himself and asked if I would like a brownie. He held the box toward me and smiled. I accepted his offer. He said his name was Duncan, and he was a journalism student heading home to Dorchester for the holidays. I told him I was Becky. Brownies were quite tasty, and as we shared this chocolate treat, we expanded on the details of our trip and lives. By the time we'd finished the second brownie, we were good friends, and even began to join in with the songsters in the back. Duncan laughed easily, and I found much of what he said to be quite amusing. I may have even giggled. I couldn't remember when I last giggled, but it felt wonderful. Time flew by, and when we finally saw the conductor again, I ordered up sandwiches and drinks for us both. I'm not certain what kind they were, but at the time, I thought they were the best sandwiches I'd ever eaten. I think that's what happens when you travel and your meal schedule is disrupted. I've often thought about Duncan over the years and that train ride. I'm not really certain why, but I think it's just one of those random and unlikely events that sticks in your mind. It was a trip that I was dreading at a time of great distress, and while I was excited to be headed towards Sarah and her family, I was leaving behind a great piece of me and of Henry. Then, out of the blue, comes an affable young man who, with the simple action of sharing a dessert, lifts my spirits. I told him about Henry and my teaching. I talked almost non-stop for hours. He too filled me in on his life and hopes. I remember he said the brownies were a gift from his friend Katie. No, not Katie. From Kathy. But maybe that was Kathy with a C. He thought she was so nice. He'd made many friends at school, but he wasn't ready to be alone for Christmas, and his trip home had been a last-minute decision. Following our supper, I believe we finished off the brownies, and I, being very tired, fell into a deep and restful sleep. I wouldn't have thought it possible. I hadn't slept that well for years. I gave Duncan a hug when I got off the train. He didn't seem to mind, and he wished me a wonderful holiday and hoped everything worked out for me. I wished him the same. Sarah was meeting me at the station, and she seemed rather perplexed when she saw me wrap my arms around a stranger. I could have been his grandmother, but I wasn't. Just a random companion for a short period of time. Why I remember that journey with a fair degree of clarity, I don't really know, except as I've said, there are moments in time and people that just make an impression on you. These memories are kept in a special place, and when you need to relive them, they just appear. Duncan and the brownies is one of mine. I did have a wonderful Christmas that year, and my move into Sarah's home was a good one. I stayed with her and the family for about 12 years. I had my own space and they had theirs, but I was able to be the live-in childcare they needed and wanted. And I was as happy as a grandmother can be. As the children grew older, there was less for me to do, and so I decided to find a small seniors apartment and move. Sarah was a bit reluctant to let me go, but my health was still good at the time, and I wanted some real independence again. I had new friends, and we traveled together for years, several years. Eventually, I began to slow down, and my thoughts often returned to my life with Henry. I found I missed him more and more. I'd sometimes spend the entire morning chatting with him. Not really, of course, but in my mind. And while some might think that rather odd and indicative of a decline in my mental state, I found it comforting and so very natural. I spent more time watching television, and one day I saw Duncan. I'm certain of it. There he was, right on my television. He was older, but still looked the same. People don't really age much between 20 and 35. He was being interviewed about his thoughts on an election or something. I couldn't get the sound up on the telly as quickly as I'd like, so I missed much of it, but I recognized that face. I called Sarah and told her I had just seen the young man from the train. It took her several minutes to remember what I was referring to, and I don't think she really believed me. I insisted I was correct, though, and when I reminded her he'd been a journalism student and very interested in what was going on in the world, she came round. "Well, that's nice, Mum," she said. "So now you know someone famous." I said I guessed I did. It looked to me like some of his dreams had come true, and it made me quite happy. I thought it would be nice to let him know I had done all right too, but I expected he'd forgotten all about me and our trip. He would have had many adventures since that Christmas, and my memories wouldn't be his memories. Later that night, I told Henry I'd seen Duncan on the television. I giggled as I remembered how we'd eaten brownies, sang, and laughed our way back to New Brunswick. Henry thought it was a lovely memory. Duncan's friend must have been a special baker. And that's Becky's reply. From Finally. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed Duncan's read. I thought it just made sense to put them together. And that's it. From a very warm back deck somewhere near Georgian Bay. I'm Susan McElroy. Remember, read a poem out loud. Cheers. Bye.